Folks in IT often actively avoid learning how to speak the language of business. We fail to acquire the skills that allow us to make our case, and this doesn't serve us as monitoring engineers or as IT professionals. We can do better, and that's what I'd like to discuss. But first, I'd like to start with a story. This is my friend Phil. Now, it's hard to get a sense of scale, but Phil is 6'4". He's every ounce of something north of 300 pounds, and he's been my friend since high school, which is the only reason he would let me use this picture of him. Now, Phil is an executive chef. He studied in the Culinary Institute of America. He's had jobs like being the executive chef over at the Ritz-Carlton, a few other places. But now, Phil has a cushy job as an executive chef at a 500-bed major metropolitan hospital system. So for those people who aren't familiar with how commercial food preparation works, here's a little bit of a summary. Meals are planned and prepped 3 services ahead. After breakfast, the staff is already making breakfast for the following day. Food is prepped to 75% and then it's put into a cooler, not a freezer, a cooler. At meal service, the food is brought out, heated to 100% and served, which means that proper cooling temperature is essential to avoid problems that put people into the hospital. Well, my friend Phil came and told me he was having a problem with his coolers. It wasn't keeping everything at the right temperature, which meant there were a lot of problems with the food, and that was an issue. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is my chance to help my friend. I mean, all I would need is some Cat5 cables, some industrial temperature sensors, a little Raspberry Pi box, and all of a sudden Phil's going to have notifications on his phone about when the food is too hot or too cold or out of spec or whatever it is. That's great. We priced it out, $5,000 out the door. Fantastic. Phil took the idea to his management, and their response was less than enthusiastic, let's just say. All right, fine. We tabled the idea, no big deal. Well, 3 months later, it happened. The air conditioning went out. Actually, that's not what happened. What happened was somebody on third shift left one of the cooler doors open. That meant the compressor kept running all night, and around 1 o'clock in the morning, the compressor completely died, which meant that the temperature in the open cooler and all the other coolers started to rise steadily. By the time first shift came in, none of the food was able to be used, which meant they had to have an emergency food order. They needed to have emergency overtime to get everybody in to start preparing breakfast and then lunch and then all the 3 meals ahead. Of course, they had an emergency repair for the air conditioner. Total cost, say it with me now, $1 million. Okay, so let's do some Monday morning quarterbacking. What went wrong? Maybe the executives are less than enlightened. It's possible. However, that's not what went wrong. What went wrong is that a geek, a technical person, explained a technical solution to a chef. And then that chef had to explain a technical solution to a business executive. So you think maybe the value proposition of that whole thing was lost in translation? Yeah, that's what happened. So what I want to talk to you about is how to make our case. And there's really 2 times that you can make your case. Up front when you're setting up monitoring, or every single day. Let's talk about making our case up front first. Now, before I go into that, I'd like to point out something. In IT, we love languages. We love our command line languages, whether that is the DOS prompt or PowerShell or whatever it is. We love our programming languages, the one true line of code, whether that's .NET or Perl or anything else. We love our different monitoring systems which have their own syntactic variations. We love our languages that belong to culture, for example, Star Trek or Star Wars or Tolkien, or different sports like, I don't know, curling, that have their own language that go along with it also. And finally, we love our actual languages, Spanish and French and Klingon and Elvish and all of those. We love those languages. And the thing about those languages is that they give us a sense of the culture that comes along with it. And I'd like to point out that business is just another language. Now, when I learn a language, it doesn't mean that I stop being able to speak my original language. It also doesn't mean that I become the culture that goes with that language. I simply have an appreciation for it. And that's what we want to do. So, I'd like you to dust off your passport because I'm going to take you to a strange and exotic land called management. Because we're going to learn to speak that language now. So here is the Xenophobe's Guide to Management. First of all, I have to ask a question. Do you even know what the business wants to hear about problems, let alone how to communicate it? So you probably don't. And there are two major fears that IT professionals have that hold them back from learning this type of language. The first fear is that if we understand how management thinks, the next step is we become that pointy-haired boss, right? But that's not the worst fear. The worst fear is if we learn how to sell a solution, ooh, sell, that means we become sales, and that means that we become pure evil. So we don't want that to happen. And the fact is that's not true. It's also not effective. You see, management doesn't care about the tech, so stop talking about it. If I'm standing on a street in Paris screaming in English, not only are people not going to understand me, they're not going to want to help me either. Stop shouting in tech to management. But there's some good news. They don't care because they hired you. You're the one who understands that language, and they believe you when you say this is going to work. Really what you need to do now is translate that into a form that they understand. And the other good news is that business really only cares about three things. They care about increasing revenue, reducing cost, or removing risk. You need to frame your technical project in one of those three ways or more, and then they're going to be able to listen to you. They're going to be able to understand. You won't be shouting in tech to somebody who doesn't speak that language. And the fact is that your manager wants to help you. They want to say yes, but you need to help them by giving that business case, because even if your manager is one of those people who's made that leap from a technical role into a management role, they have to explain it to their boss, who probably doesn't have that background. So you need to help them do the translation as well. Or, to put it another way, if you like it, you should have put it into your fiscal request for the budget year. All right, so that's how to make the case up front. After a short break, I'm going to talk about how to make the case every single day. Welcome back. Now I'd like to talk about how we make our case every single day. So what you're looking at is a fairly standard monitoring design. You've got the three pillars of observability. You have an alerting engine. You have a ticketing system tied to a knowledge base. Of course, you have long-term storage and reporting. So what's missing from this design? Was it worth it? Is any of this, any single monitor, any single alert, worth the effort that it takes? Well, how do you know that? How do you figure it out? Here's one way of calculating it. You take the cost to run a system per hour, per minute, the value that it brings in, something about it, something financial about that system. You take the duration of an unalerted event. That means the time it takes to notice a problem, and then the time it takes to repair that problem. And then you see what monitoring and alerting reduces in terms of that time. That gives you the formula to know how much value an alert or a monitor brings to the system, and that's how you know whether it's worth it to do it. Now, of course, you can make that formula much more complicated. You can add in variables like the cost of an emergency vendor visit, or the cost of staff overtime during the repair, or the cost of emergency parts. And this should start to sound a little familiar, because it's exactly the story of me and my friend Phil. This is what we did wrong. If Phil and I had done the math and brought that to his management, we'd have gotten the system, and they wouldn't have had to spend $1 million to save $5,000. The mostly unnecessary summary. Do you buy those protection plans from the electronics store? You probably don't, because you don't need to spend $5 to protect your $20 headphone investment. But you do buy the extended warranty on your car because the left tie rod could cost you $80,000. Don't let monitoring fall into the same trap. You need to be able to understand the value that monitoring has. You need to have the numbers that prove that value, and you need to build the skills to communicate that value to management, the people who are going to enable you to put that monitoring in place and provide that value to your organization. Thank you. Oh, we got it.
It's an outtake, so I feel like we got it.
Okay.